So, but isn't that essentially how we operate now? We have that opportunity to operate just like that now, yes?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So, nothing changes then?
Well, I say that. I think that it's less likely because you have an outside agreement to acquire power at a particular rate from OUC. Therefore, you pass that through to the customer. And those agreements bind you to that. So there's a certain amount of those agreements dictating the decisions of the commission.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wood?
I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the concern is if I were to clone myself and come in with solar panels all over my shirts or as my girlfriend says, the hair shirt plan, this would be a concern that if you only build a plant that's a certain capacity, then you got nowhere to go. And nobody's likely to approve cloning 5 of me. Anybody is likely to do that, so that's good. But I think is it not pretty likely, we're going to have the agreements with Stanton and St. Lucie, they run out another decade and some. So we will still be on a mix of sources, whatever we do, for a while, which gives you some insulation from crazy people like me, which I think is a good thing. So I think I would tend to agree with Commissioner Maxwell's interpretation that although I see the concern as a potential negative, it seems like the differential to what we're doing now is probably not that huge. And I think if we had our wits about us, we're going to, or we or whoever makes the decision, that if we decide we want to upgrade our existing plant, we've all thought about the possibility of nimble plants that can supply short-term peak power and sell it at a good rate outside of the city as a source of, a way of subsidizing, making some actual money on it. So I think if we're awake, we're going to design some extra capacity into the thing anyhow. Whether we use it ourselves or whether we sell it outside, it seems like that would be a wise thing to do. We've got the gas line, it's probably an incremental cost on capital costs, but it has a lot of potential to be helpful, whether for growth or for selling it. I think that's a short-term producer. So.
Commissioner Amoruso?
You had mentioned going out for an RFP. What timeline are you putting on that? Is that something you need direction from us tonight to start working on to get that out?
We would appreciate that, Commissioner. You're going to, Clay, help me with the timelines. You're going to have to extend the 2 years. That's a must. That runs out in my glasses on.
Isn't it true that we have a 3-year contract that started January 2014, so that runs out January 2017?
Yes.
And then on top of, so that's 2 years out, and then on top of that we had pretty much a built-in option for another 2 years if we want to do it.
That's correct, January 1st, 2019.
19.
Right, so
If
after that...
If we choose to extend the contracts with OUC, we'll have
But the-
1-year options.
The planning for that is going to have to start well in advance
of the 4 years.
Of that selection for the 2 years.
Yeah.
You really want to be ahead of that
Yeah.
curve.
My second question is probably directed to you, Clay. There was an issue that happened last week with an FP&L or a tie line or something going down for a couple days, and we didn't get updated on it for a couple. Help me understand. Does that have to do with the timeline, or what was that?
No, that's the transmission services agreement we have with FPL to provide us what they call network services. In other words, every bit of energy we can take off of the system, be it from OUC or be it from St. Lucie or be it purchased power, comes into our system through their transmission line, and they limited us to that capability 2 weeks ago, I think it was.
So we actually had to produce our own?
That's correct, yes.
And how are we alerted? Because I know it was like 2 days before basic people, and I don't know that I ever got an email on it. how are we alerted to that when something like that, and or the UAP board?
I found out about it from a received dispatch group that said, oh, by the way, you're running because of limitations, and we don't know what the limitations are all the time, or how long.
It's an operational issue, honestly, and I think we can report to you on it.
Sooner than later, yeah.
Yeah, because
There's a lot of moving pieces.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Let me ask you a question. So you say you found out through the operator, the control?
Oh, you said.
We are dispatched through FMPP, or the Municipal Power Pool. They go through, they call them a cases board. They dispatch the units based on economics and on transmission capabilities.
So
Is your
they,
microphone on, Clay? It's like you're whispering to me.
He does.
so
Talk really loud, please.
So, what you're saying here is that, you know, we get the call to produce electricity. And that's just part of our ongoing operations. When it's more cost efficient or beneficial to the whole system, we're called upon to generate our own electricity.
That's correct. We oftentimes don't know the reason why. It could be a
Right.
reliability function, it could be a transmission function.
So what you're saying here today is that they asked us to go into production mode, and we did, and then you found out after the fact that the reason we were forced into that situation is because we were having issues with transmission.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And
Commissioner McBoyd?
And those issues were not physical, that the line, you couldn't get any more electrons through it. It was legal that we have an agreement to a certain amount of transmission, or was it?
To this day.
Let's come back and investigate that, okay? Let's get more details on that and not debate that. We have our EUAB here, we can have an update on the next meeting. City Manager, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Lisa, I'm sorry, Commissioner Zerman, is it in reference to that issue?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
With the 3+1+1 with OUC, what's the potential of just getting another +1+1? Just,
I think the issue is one of a procurement issue, that the RFP, maybe the city manager can jump in on this, but, you know, that contractually, you have an RFP process, you can extend that 1 year, but at the end of your contract, ultimately, you have to go out for another RFP,
Renegotiate the numbers.
as opposed to continuing with the same.
we have
Yeah.
vendors and things that are continuing services. It wasn't open-ended or anything, but would it be discretionary?
There's a lot of things that have happened in the city over the past, but best practices and what the Inspector General and everyone looks for is to follow the rules, as Ms. Maxwell was just saying. So on a 5-year contract max, it's hard to just keep extending that without justifying going out for an actual RFP process. But whatever the legal advice we get from the attorneys out here, we would recommend that. Okay.
Can we look at the third option? Is somebody mind turning that air down? It's very warm in here. It's very warm.
I'm saying the
That's a
electricity.
switch. It's usually that way.
You can't touch your
Heat
mic.
in here.
It was very steamy. Clammy. Usually it's freezing in here.
So the last option that we looked at was selling the utility. And of course, this generated probably the most discussion and comments. Let me preface this by saying that we have been closely, as a board, monitoring the situation in Bureau, because we believe that there are many parallels between our city and Bureau, especially in terms of the agreements and whether those agreements can be changed, voided. And candidly, our latest update is that Bureau is effectively stalled, that they have been unable to successfully enter into an agreement that would release them from their bond obligations as well as their other contractual obligations. And thus, FP&L has withdrawn their offer. So I'm sure there's many more details mixed in with that, but it appears that that sale is not going to be able to proceed. Now, we of course will continue to monitor this on a regular basis, but we have really reviewed, delved into this, asked more questions than you can imagine, and the legal entanglements to sell this utility are just absolutely, virtually insurmountable.
Could you catch everyone up to date to just explain the obligations to St. Lucie Stanton and what they were looking to do?
We have obligations to the Stanton and St. Lucie. The Stanton 1 debt is through 2020. These are the bonds. Stanton 2 debt to KUA is to Kissimmee, is a permanent obligation. And St. Lucie debt is through 2027. Now that's just for the bonds. There are ongoing obligations for maintenance of these plants until the plant is no longer in existence. So well beyond the payoff date of these bonds, which these bonds are not just the City of Lake Worth's obligations. These bonds are other municipal utility organizations that participated in that bond issue, and collectively, they all must vote to release whoever wants to get out of the bond obligation from that obligation. Now, even if you stroke them a check for the full amount and were able to satisfactorily negotiate a number to satisfy the future maintenance obligations, they could still say no.
Is that what they did to Vera?
My understanding, Clay, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they were unsuccessful in achieving a vote for that.
They haven't gotten that far yet. There are several, at least 3 hurdles to pass before you ever get to that point. One is with the IRS, one is with the bond holders themselves. And
Can you yell? I'm gonna
Yeah, let me
teach you to
let
yell.
me see if I can try here.
I'm sitting right in front of you and I can barely hear.
Tip the mic forward.
The first hurdle he mentioned is the Internal Revenue Service, and essentially, Bureau would have to obtain a private letter ruling from the Internal Revenue Service, which would allow, a municipal bond is essentially a governmental bond. And so for someone to come in and buy out that obligation, they would have to be another municipal entity or governmental entity. Florida Power and Light is not that. So in order for Florida Power and Light to be able to do that, the Internal Revenue Service would literally have to have a private letter ruling issued saying this is okay. As you can imagine, that's a big deal in and of itself. The second, and that would open the door potentially to a host of other problems that I don't believe the Internal Revenue Service wishes to open. Number 2 is the other bondholders. In order for you to be able to prematurely satisfy a bond obligation, unless it's in totality, so unless everybody came together that was a part of that bond and paid off, stroked a check for the full obligation, essentially all of the bondholders would have to say yes if just one of them wanted to get out and stroke a check for just their obligation. So you have to get through those 2 hurdles first before you can then go to the municipal power agency and have everybody vote there
And
to let you out.
Commissioner McCoy?
And isn't it true that at that second step you just described, if any one of those shared bondholders says, no, we're not down with that, then you're dead in the water? It has to be unanimous.
That's correct. And
Yeah.
these are very diverse. I mean, these could be Lloyd's of London, it could be, it could be anybody in that pool.
Yeah, I just would like to point out, everything that you're telling me sounds very consistent with the information I've been aware of, and I think if we were to go back, I believe, City Manager, maybe on our website, our consultant, or one of the two consultants who was involved in the last RFP, I'm drawing a blank, I think it's
Chef
first name.
Wright,
Yeah, well,
Chef
I did
Wright.
remember right, the chef I remember.
Chef Wright.
He, although it was a little dense to read, I found it a little tough going, he pretty much laid all of this out at the time, that the likelihood of being able to meet all these hurdles was pretty low. And it might be worth, in terms of thinking about pros and cons of this direction, do either of you happen to know how much Vero has spent just looking into this? I believe we were past 2 million a while back, and which means it's on the order of our annual contribution to the city. They've already spent, and they hit a dead end for it.
I don't know how much.
It was a lot.
It must be a considerable amount. They had a public referendum, they had legal fees and lawyers, and I can only imagine it was a great deal of money.
Commissioner Zerdy?
Thank you, Mayor. What, if, this is just a wild question about if you could stroke the check, what amount, what range would we be talking about?
Well, our actual debts,
Yeah.
Hey there, money bags.
Zerdy Electric.
Commissioner Zerdy's gonna write the check.
maybe on the timeline.
We can't
What a
see
nice
that.
guy.
Huge big bounce, but
We can't see that, even with glasses.
The zeros have to be before the decimal, Commissioner.
There was a previous little box that we had on the timeline which kind of gave you the numbers. But it's a multi-million dollar,
I think it's worth just having that out there. Let's see, looking at the timelines here.
It's not, I'm not seeing it on.
Dollar signs.
Clay, do you recall?
No,
A lot of zeros.
It ranged from 20 million to,
Considerably based on whether there was a 30-year payback period that included the differential you were just talking about at $3 to $4 million. You know, if you chunk that on there, that we're gonna get that payment for 30 years, that's one set of numbers, and the other set of numbers were on the other end of that, but it was substantial. I wish I could remember off the top of my head. It was a lot.
So as we talk about the sale of the utilities, how can we even discuss the sale of the utilities unless you've got a roll? I mean, I think that the discussion of that, to ask for the additional information on what it would look like, was due to the fact that somebody was already making inroads at that time, and that's since changed, since our last major meeting.
It's not there.
well, I think it's instructive to look at what we owe and to think about the value of that ongoing maintenance. And part of what you're gonna get through the RFPs that you've approved and the consultants that have been hired is just that number. So I think that's gonna be invaluable to you when you receive that information.
Okay. Commissioner Zerdy, follow up?
We're probably looking at, I mean, it's gonna be more than tens of millions. So and again, this is just asking some of these questions, but it's on my mind, and I think how likely is it for them to even get a letter from IRS like that? The probability is very minimal, would you say?
It's not, I tend not to even think about the Internal Revenue Service, but from what I understand.
They think about you.
Yeah, from what I understand and from what the attorneys have issued in opinions to the city, it's a very difficult hurdle to get through. Because you literally need them to issue an opinion that then is going to be applicable,
All sorts of places.
right, to other entities and
So
to other.
it could be precedent setting for them.
Yes, it typically is.
Which is not palatable normally, and especially with IRS, I would think.
There's a strong firewall, Commissioner, when you talk about municipal bonds and the in the investment arena, the consideration that those are given from a taxable and a non-taxable standpoint. And I don't believe that they want any blending of that, or blurring of that line to occur.
Right. So between that, bondholders, the total release and all, I mean, you know, you watch a movie that's called Dumb and Dumber.
Keep it in line there, sir.
I am.
Wow.
And part of the movie, he gets to a point where he asks her, so what do you think my chances are? And she says, it's 1,000,000 to 1. And he goes, so you think there's a chance?
I have a question for you, City Manager, or Clay. When did we obligate ourselves to St. Lucie and Stanton?
Quite a while ago.
Was it in recent years or a long time ago?
It's at least 20, 25
Is it?
years.
I don't know the answer to that, but St. Lucie just received a renewal for their nuclear certification. That's typically at the 20-year mark. So I've got to believe that we were in on the ground floor of that perhaps 20 years ago.
And the reasons for doing that back then?
Seemed like diversity.
Diversity, fuel diversity?
Yeah. And cost was assumed to be lower at that point.
Just trying to get a history on it, yeah, just trying to get a history.
It may help, Madam Mayor, if we just kind of go through the pros and then
Yeah.
the cons and then.
Oh, we didn't do that already?
I think we'll have more questions. Number one is in selling the utility, we believe that it could increase commercial competitiveness with adjacent cities, because our rate structure would be similar to neighboring municipalities, therefore attracting more businesses, residents, and the potential to shorten real estate sales times. Number two, simplify the city government's responsibilities. Smaller government, reduce the city's administrative maintenance and IT costs. Utility is a very large burden for FPL. Certainly for a city the size of Lake Worth, it's a considerable focus and requires a lot of attention. Number three, force the city to live within normal ad valorem revenue streams. Number four, the ad valorem tax and base would rise from private companies paying taxes on utility property, collecting a franchise fee from the private provider. And number five, remove the electric utility issue from politics. And just to comment on that, I think the earlier remark about politicizing, our focus was really not on the commission. Our focus was really about the community and how this is such a lightning rod issue and has been for many, many years within the community itself. And the cons. Number one, we would lose the cash cow, which represents $8 to $9 million per year in revenue to the general fund. Loss of a predictable enterprise, we lose the ability to earn money with the electric utility, and once the utility's gone, that's it. We won't be getting it back. Number two, the legal uncertainties, the expense of lawyers and consultants, the legal hurdles of the existing debt, operational obligations, expense of overcoming them, if it's even possible. Number three, sense of loss of pride of ownership of our utility. Number four, the loss of local control of rates. And number five, the loss of independence and flexibility to serve the residents. So, that completes our presentation.
When you look at the last one, loss of independence and flexibility, we just had an incident in the city in which a motel on Dixie Highway, right, was shut down because the landlord allegedly absconded with the monies that people had paid that went toward their utility money, right? Is that the story? Allegedly, I did say allegedly.
You pretty much did.
But we were able to you know, give them a grace period and help them out, and then also do that, we wouldn't have been able to do that, I'm sure. You know, if we were owned by, you know, a larger organization, so that was, I understand that piece of it. The concern I've always had with this is whether or not, I mean, one of the reasons why we've been weaning the general fund off the electric revenue is because regardless of what decision we make or another commission down the road makes, it's living within our means, number one, and making sure that that revenue is either the icing on the cake and not the flour to make it, which is kind of been the analogy that we've had. And we'd have to live without that future revenue in the sale of it. So trying to get and train us to live back within our means as we did for many, many years. And again, our neighbors and neighboring municipalities do it every day. So we have other enterprise funds. Let's not look at this, okay, once it's gone, it's gone. We have a water plan, we have sewer, we have, you know, we have other ways to generate revenue in the case of a sale. But I can't even see talking about sale as long as there is no precedent set in reference to the other, you know, our obligations, not being able to overcome our obligations. I think it's the extension of time right now is really the only choice we have, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know what's going to happen with Bureau. We don't know what's going to happen locally. We don't know the prices come down. I mean, our options will change drastically depending on when this final decision has to be made. And I don't, you know, not a decision, but Vice Mayor, help me out here.
Okay, a couple quick things. Pro number 3, forced to live within its ad valorem revenue stream. That should also be a con.
Forces.
You know, I just want to point that out.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, just, and the other thing too, and you know, I know when this really flared up here 3 or 4 years ago, the idea to maybe sell the utility, I will tell you, I'll be the first to tell you that, you know, if I went back 6 or 7 years, I'd be one of the people standing on the street corner saying sell the utility, because it seems like the most practical thing to do. But now that we know what we know, you know, it doesn't look like a practical, by any stretch, by anybody's definition, of the way to go. Even if somebody wanted to come in and offer us ungodly amounts of money, more money than it's worth, it's still, you know, all the money in the world. The bottom line is, you're gonna have entities out there that all it takes is one entity out of that group of entities to say no, and the deal's cooked. And the reality of it is, when it comes to FMPA, you know, if you look at their total obligation to St. Lucie and the others, you know, it's like a pie. They're obligated to a pie. Each of us has a slice of that pie that we're obligated to, a capacity, if you will. Well, right now, there's no capacity. We got more pie than we can eat. So there's no real motivation